Hi, I'm Miss Haley with the Huntsville-Madison County Public Library. And for today's STEM activity, I'm going to show you how to take the shell off of an egg while leaving the egg intact. This project is also sometimes called the naked egg project. And what is going to happen is the shell part of the egg is going to come off, but everything else is going to stay intact. So we're still going to have an egg. It's going to be egg-shaped, but it's not going to have a shell. So for this project, you are going to need some eggs. You don't have to have multiple. You can just do one. I'm doing two today just in case one breaks. These are fairly delicate once they're finished because their protection is being removed. Their shell is being removed. So I am going to do two just in case I have a break today. You're going to need a clear glass for each egg. So however many eggs you do, you need a clear glass for each one. You can't do multiple in a container. At least I do not recommend that you do multiple in a container. Your glass needs to be deep enough that your egg can fit in it with a little bit of room at the top because we're going to completely cover our egg in liquid. And that liquid is going to be distilled white vinegar. So you need some distilled white vinegar. Now, I recommend, you can really technically use any vinegar for this, but I recommend distilled white because it is clear. Contrary to the fact that it says white, it is clear. And so it's not going to give your egg any weird colors. However, eggs are really cool. So you can do a couple experiments if you want to make this into an experiment. So you could do 3 vinegars. So you could do one with each egg. So you could do an egg in distilled white. You can do an egg then in apple cider, which is sort of an amber color. And then you can do an egg in balsamic vinegar and see what happens. Just see what happens. All of those should take the shell off the egg, but I think your egg will look very different at the end. That is my hypothesis anyway. I have not done that, so that's an experiment. You could also try adding food coloring. I also do not know what that would do, but for the base project, we're just going to use distilled white vinegar. And I do want to warn you guys, this project takes time. So even though this video is going to be about 5 or 10 minutes long, depending on how long I talk, the project itself actually takes at least 24 hours, sometimes 48. It really depends on how thick these shells are. And you're going to have to wait that long. Like, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to put my egg in there and pour the vinegar on and poof, the shell disappears. So when it doesn't happen right away, or even in a couple of hours, just know that that's okay, and that's what it's supposed to do, and it takes some time, okay? So leave them sitting at least overnight, at least 24 hours, and you should see that shell come off. Once you have your shell off, you might have, I like to leave it 48 because it completely takes the shell off, but it does leave the egg a little bit more delicate because it's been in the vinegar longer. So if you take it 24 hours, you might still notice some white patches. What you can do is you can take it under cold water and just very, very, very gently, so gentle, like a butterfly, so gentle. You can just very gently rub the shell off that's remaining. So if you're impatient and you want to do that, that's an option. Just know that you might accidentally break it if you're not gentle enough. So for this, we're going to take our eggs and we're going to gently place them in our cups, and we're going to pour vinegar on it. It's very simple, very easy to set this experiment up. And what's going to happen, we'll see if we can see some of it happening from the beginning. So you're going to pour vinegar, fill it up. If your egg is floating, that's okay. Eggs will, depending on their age, kind of float or not. And, okay, good. Both of mine are fairly fresh, so they're not going to float. But if your egg is floating, that's fine. Just make sure you come and periodically turn it so that the top side is not being ignored. We want that top side to get in the vinegar too. So just turn it occasionally if they are floating and some of the shell is peeping out. So we've got our eggs in vinegar, and let me bring one up close so that you guys can see really up close what's happening here. So if you look really closely at your egg, and your vinegar, you should see bubbles coming up off the egg into the air. It'll come up to the surface of the vinegar and then it'll be in the air. You should see lots of little bubbles all over your egg. And that is an observation. So as you are doing this project, check on it periodically and just observe. Let me move that to the center. Observe what is happening. Look, you can see my little fingertip print in the egg. That's kind of cool. I'm going to do it again. So try that too. Touch it with your finger once it's in there. You'll see a little circle form. It'll probably eventually, yeah, this one's already gone away. So what's happening here is a chemical reaction. It doesn't look like much of a chemical reaction, I know. It's not very dramatic in the moment, but it is a chemical reaction. And vinegar is an acid. And we've done, recently we did a Kool-Aid video where we mixed vinegar and Kool-Aid and saw it fizz. So we know that vinegar and baking soda will fizz up. And baking soda is a base and vinegar is an acid. So when you mix vinegar, an acid, and a base together, you get a chemical reaction. And so vinegar is our acid. The eggshell is actually our base. Eggshells are made of calcium carbonate, which is a chemical compound. And the vinegar is reacting with that chemical compound. It's breaking it down. And that's how the shell is getting removed, is this chemical reaction is slowly removing the shell. So what's going to happen is that calcium and carbonate, the calcium carbonate is going to split. The vinegar is going to break it apart in the chemical reaction, and the calcium is going to stay in our vinegar. So when we're done, we're going to be left with vinegar with calcium in it. And the carbonate is going to turn into carbon dioxide, and that's why we see all these little bubbles. Those are carbon dioxide bubbles, and they're going to eventually float to the surface. You can see them if you're looking at your vinegar floating to the surface. Once they get to the surface, they'll pop, and it'll disperse into the air. So it is giving off carbon dioxide right now, not any kind of dangerous amounts or anything. That, carbon dioxide is pretty much everywhere. We breathe it out. So it is going to give off carbon dioxide, and when we're done, when it's completely dissolved that base, we'll be left with our naked egg. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we're left with in a while. We're going to let this sit for at least, like I said, 24 hours. Okay, so it has been about 48 hours, or maybe about 30 minutes shy of 48 hours. I'm not sure. I don't really remember what time I started filming, but we're very close to 48 hours. And I'm going to clean my table off a little bit. We don't want any debris on our table, especially anything sharp, because when we take these eggs out, they are going to be fairly fragile because their shells are gone. Their shell is their protection. So I'm also going to put down some paper towels just because there is going to be vinegar dripping everywhere. And I can change my table covering, but we can also put some paper towels down. They will help protect it, hopefully, a little bit too. Maybe I'll tuck that one under. Don't want the edge. All right, so now that we have paper towels down, we're going to start looking and examining our eggs. So this is 48 hours after our project started. You can tell that if you go back to the first of the video, you can tell how much bigger this egg is. It is really, really big. They started out about this big. They were very small eggs. And now it is quite large. Let's look at this one. It is also really, really big. It's maybe a little longer than the other one was. You can see all those bubbles around the egg. Those are the carbon dioxide bubbles from where the vinegar is breaking down the calcium carbonate on the shell. And all this foamy stuff up here, part of that is also carbon dioxide bubbles creating foam, but some of that white stuff is actually the calcium left behind in the vinegar where it has not dissolved in the vinegar. So why are the eggs so big, do you think? What do you guys think? What made them get big? Well, they're a little swollen, and they're swollen with vinegar. So there's actually vinegar now inside our egg. And what has happened is as we got the shell away, ooh, it feels really fun. You touch it very, very, very gently. I don't recommend doing this if you have sharp fingernails. If you touch it very gently, it feels kind of slick and slimy a little bit. I think the sliminess is really just because it's wet, but so it's swollen with the vinegar because when we take the shell away, what's left is the membrane of the egg. So we have, in an egg, we have its yolk, we have its chalaza, which is this little white, if you crack an egg, you'll see this little white squiggly thing, and that's what connects. It holds the yolk in place in the center. It gives it some stability. And we have the white of the egg, and then we have the membrane, which is surrounding the egg. And usually you don't see that part when you crack an egg. You might see it if you hard boil one and peel it. Some of that membrane might get left behind, especially if you're making deviled eggs. You want to peel that off because that's gross. But we are left with just the membrane. So there's no more shell, or there's very, very little shell anyway. And I'm going to go ahead and reach in here and take it out. If you've got any cuts on your hand, this might sting a little bit. Woo! Gross. And so it's coated. You guys can see it smells really vinegary and it's really swollen, and that vinegar has gotten into the membrane. So the membrane is still there. How did it get to the other side? That's weird, right? Well, it's actually science, and it's called osmosis. So osmosis is the process by which a liquid or a particle, sometimes an atom, can go from one side of a membrane to the inside, and it's moving through this semi-permeable membrane. So on the outside of this, we still have some shell and it's actually calcium. It's not really shell anymore, is it? Just some calcium left on there. And it's still very slimy. So we are gonna go and wash this off. Are you guys ready to come with me and wash it off? But you can see my swollen egg here. And then we're gonna play with it a little bit. Okay, so here we are at the sink. The lighting is very different over here. It's very dark. We're in a closet. And if you guys look, you can see this kind of gunk on here. That's the calcium, and we're just very gentle. I'm being very, very gentle. If you push on this, it will break. We're going to rinse it off. And to rinse it, I am just very gently rubbing back and forth under the water, just letting the very, very gentle friction of my finger and the water start to wash off the remaining calcium. You have to be very careful when you're doing this also not to drop it. If you have a white spot that's not moving, like there's a white sheen to this egg still a little bit. I'm not sure how well you can see that on the camera, but if it's not coming off, just leave it. That's just the color of that membrane. All right, we're gonna come back over here. So we have our egg. This is our washed off egg. He is shellless. And we have our membrane. And if you feel him, he's kind of squishy. You don't want to squish him. He'll break. And make sure, guys, after you do this, especially if your egg breaks, that you wash your hands. It is always best when handling raw eggs to wash your hands afterwards. That's very, very important. But the really maybe coolest thing about this egg is that if I drop it, it's bouncy. So that membrane makes it bouncy, which is really cool. Just make sure you're doing it on a soft surface, a clean surface that doesn't have anything sharp or debris on it. I hope you guys have fun making naked eggs, and I hope to see what you make, especially if you do the experiment with the 3 vinegars. I would love to see what happens if you guys decide to do that way. And you can send those to us on our Facebook. You can message them to us. Our Facebook page is Huntsville, Madison County Public Library. And we would love to hear from you, and we might feature you on our Facebook page. Thank you.